Welcome to Moonlit Romantic, a quiet place for tender stories told softly for the end of your day. Tonight's story is Stolen Summer Nights. After a year that asked too much, Jenna Matthews returns to Lakeshore Lodge, to cedar air, lemon bars, and the dock that kept her childhood secrets. There she meets Luke, a wanderer with kind hands and lake-colored eyes, and together they remember how to breathe, canoes at dawn, ice cream at noon, fireflies and a starlight sway beneath fairy lights. This is a summer of small consistencies, of goodbyes that sound like commas, and courage that looks like two people standing on the same dock, ready to begin again. So settle in, loosen your shoulders, feel the day fall away like sunlight on water, and let the story carry you gently to rest. Chapter 1. The Way Back. The road to Lakeshore Lodge curled along the water like an old ribbon, faded but still precious. Jenna Matthews lowered the windows and let the warm wind carry the scents she remembered: sun on cedar, fishweed, vanilla from the little ice cream stand that always opened 2 weeks too early and closed 2 weeks too late. The lake flashed through the pines in pieces, silver here, blue there, like shy laughter. She had not been back for years. Work had eaten whole summers, then the city had swallowed what was left of her patience. After a grueling year and a stack of sleepless nights that felt like pebbles in her shoes, she had driven north with a single promise. She would rest, she would breathe, she would remember who she was before every moment needed a spreadsheet. The lodge came into view all at once, as if it had been holding its breath for her return. The main house centered on the slope above the shore, a long, low building of weathered logs and green trimmed, windows, porches threaded with rocking chairs. Down by the dock, red canoes were stacked like cheerful commas, waiting for the next sentence of summer. The bell on the boathouse door, the one that always rang when someone pushed it with their hip, still hung at its jaunty angle. Everything was smaller than childhood had insisted, and somehow larger in the heart. Jenna parked beneath a sugar maple and sat for a minute, hands loose on the steering wheel. Fat bumblebees were working the wild clover by her front tire. A dragonfly stitched the air with blue. She could hear a screen door slam and a voice call, "Back by supper," in the tone of a prayer, disguised as an instruction. Her own mother had said the same thing here when the days were long, and her knees were perpetually green with grass. Jenna's eyes prickled. She swallowed, smiled at herself, and got out of the car. Inside the main house, the front desk wore a vase of black-eyed Susans and a guest book that had run out of its first life and been taped into a second. Ruth, who had been working these summers since Jenna could remember, emerged from the back office with a pencil tucked in her bun and happiness in her eyes. "Look what the lake brought home," Ruth said, folding Jenna into a flower-dusted hug that smelled of lemon bars. "You are a sight for sore memory." "I am older and softer," Jenna said to her shoulder, "and I hope the lemon bars are for me. They are for the universe, which includes you." Ruth held her by the elbows to look her over. "A room in the birch cabins, just like old times. The one with the crooked step you loved, and everyone else complains about. I always thought it felt like the cabin was smiling," Jenna said. "Exactly." Ruth slid a brass key across the desk. It was heavy and familiar, etched with the number of a door that had once felt like a promise. "Breakfast is at 7 or at 8 or whenever you wander in hungry. Coffee on the porch by sunrise, canoes at dawn, and the jazz trio starts again. This weekend if the weather behaves." She lowered her voice, conspiratorial. "You know the rules. First day, no plans." Jenna saluted. "No plans," she repeated, and felt something inside her loosen, like a tight knot finally. Willing to learn, the birch cabins sat in a dapple of light and shadow, where the slope met the trees. Her door opened on the remembered creek. Inside, the bedspread was clean and quilted, the windows full of green. In the tiny kitchen, someone had left a jar of wildflowers and a note in a looping hand, "Welcome home for now." Jenna set her bag on the chair and stood very still, letting the quietness gather like a friend. Somewhere, lake water slapped softly against rocks. Somewhere, a screen door thumped, a comfort and a metronome. She kicked off her shoes and walked down to the dock in her bare feet. The boards were warm against her soles. The lake lay like a coin flipped up to the sun and caught before it fell. A boy pushed a red canoe into the shallows and clambered in, laughter skittering behind him like minnows. At the end of the dock, a man sat with his feet in the water, trousers rolled, shirt sleeves cuffed, face tipped to the sky, as if listening to the birds explain something important. Jenna stopped a few paces away to watch the light. He turned at the small sound of her step. He was younger than she had assumed from the set of his shoulders, older than the boy who believed in bottomless summers. Handsome, yes, in a way that did not announce itself. Sun-browned a few. Days of scruff, hair that had made peace with wind. His eyes were lake-colored, that elusive shade between blue and green. He smiled as if they had agreed in advance to meet here. "Afternoon," he said, His voice had the edges sanded off by road and weather. Perfect day to arrive. "It is good to be here," Jenna said, and her voice surprised her with how honest it sounded. He patted the board beside him. "Feet in," he advised. "It is the lodge law. You do not want to start off with a ticket." "Are there tickets?" She laughed, but slipped down to sit, rolled her jeans, and lowered her feet. The water was cool and soft, like fruit with a bite taken from the chill. "Only verbal warnings," he said gravely. "I am new. I am learning the rules." Jenna looked sideways. "New as of when?" He rubbed the back of his neck, considering. "As of this morning, as of yesterday, as of the day before that, in the way that matters." "Passing through?" she guessed gently. He nodded, glancing toward the horizon as if it kept time. "Something like that." "I am Jenna," she offered, "because docks can be ships and introductions can be ropes thrown between them." "Luke," he said. "Luke Carter." He tipped an invisible hat, a tiny showman's gesture that made her smile. They sat with their feet in the lake, practicing the ancient rite of not needing to fill every silence. A loon called from somewhere past the point, a yodel that threaded the afternoon together. A breeze lifted a strand of Jenna's hair and laid it against her cheek. Luke watched the water with a quiet attention that made her wonder what else he watched with such care. "First time here, Luke Carter?" Jenna asked after a while. "First time at this lake," he said. "Not the first time a lake has fixed me." The corner of his mouth tilted. "You grew up on these boards." "I grew up trying to jump off them without making a splash," Jenna said. "I never managed it. Too much joy." "That is the best reason to fail," he said. They traded small histories, the way people trade shells, holding them up to the sun, laughing at the odd shapes. She told him about the canoe races of her childhood, about the time she and her cousin had slept on the porch in sleeping bags and woken with dew in their hair. He told her about working in cities where neon washed out the stars, about moving every few months when the air in his apartment began to feel like a held breath. He was a mechanic of many things, it seemed, and a maker of nothing he could not leave behind. The lake made him look less restless, though. It smoothed his edges. Ruth called to Jenna from the path, lemon bars, kitchen, before the locusts who call themselves children discover them. And Jenna laughed and stood, her damp feet leaving neat prints on the boards. "Come," she said to Luke. "You should know about the lemon bars. They are why the sun rises properly." He came, grinning, and took a square of gold on a napkin like a student being initiated. He closed his eyes on the first bite. "You did not oversell." "Ruth never undersells," Jenna said. "That is her magic." Evening slid over the lake like a silk shawl. Lanterns strung along the path winked awake. A guitar started up by the fire pit, hesitant at first, then sure. Jenna carried plates back to the kitchen. When she stepped outside again, Luke was standing by the little bulletin board where the week's list of activities had been pinned, with thumbtacks that always chose to bend at dramatic angles. canoe skills at dawn, nature walk at 10, ice cream scoops on the dock at noon, campfire songs and s'mores at 9, starlight sway beneath the fairy lights at 10. Starlight sway, Luke read aloud, amused. Is that a dance or a hypnotism technique? Yes, Jenna said. Would you like proof? He looked at her, not quite sideways, smile deepening. I suppose I would, tonight, she said, and the word and felt like lighting a lantern in her own chest. If you are, what was it, passing through at a leisurely pace? For a night, he said. For a night, I am the least restless person you know. They wandered toward the fire pit as the first stars stitched themselves into the sky. Fireflies began their sweet punctuation in the tall grass like notes from a quiet orchestra. Someone handed out long sticks and marshmallows. Someone else shushed a story into the dark. Jenna settled on a log, the heat of the fire meeting the cool from the water, and making a weather all its own. Luke sat beside her, their shoulders an elegant accident. He listened the way he looked at the lake, with patient attention, and asked only the kind of questions that make answers feel welcome. Later, beneath a net of fairy lights that had been slung low along the path between the boathouse and the birches, a small speaker began to murmur old songs. People paired up without fuss, with the awkward courage lakes give to strangers. Luke held out a hand, a simple offering. Jenna took it, and the world made room for the step they took together. They swayed more than danced, the way trees sway when wind is gentle. His hand was warm through the thin cotton of her shirt. The night smelled of wood smoke and shampoo and the first apples of the season, whispering in the dark. Welcome home, Luke said, his breath close enough to translate warmth. For now, Jenna answered, and felt how large those words could be when the right person handed them to you. When she finally climbed the crooked step to her cabin and unlocked the door, she looked back to the dock. Luke stood at the end, hands in his pockets, talking to the water, as if confirming travel plans with a friend. The lake made small sounds around his ankles, and for a sliver of a second, Jenna had the wild feeling that summer had been waiting for this exact arrangement. A woman with a tired heart and a man with a restless one, two silhouettes cut from the night and edged in starlight, listening to the same quiet. She slept with the window open and dreamed of paddles biting water, of lemon sugar on her tongue, of a horizon that did not ask questions, only offered answers in the language of light. Chapter 2: The Golden Afternoon. The lodge woke early. Birds negotiated treaties in the birches. Canoes thumped softly against the dock, eager. Coffee found its way to mugs and porches like a faithful dog. Jenna pulled on a sweatshirt and padded down to the water, with a thermos and the kind of smile that does not know it is happening. Mist lay on the lake in a thin collar, a scarf the morning would shrug off. She sat cross-legged on the dock and let the quiet polish her. You have secured the good seat, Luke said, appearing with the stealth of a person who had learned how to move without worrying the day. He carried a battered travel mug and a cinnamon roll the size of his palm already missing one bite. Taxes were paid to the coffee authority, Jenna said. I am in good standing. He lowered himself beside her, toes skimming the surface. Want to learn canoe turns from a man who read the manual on his phone last night? I was a counselor in training once, she said. I can wipe the lake with you. Name your boat, he countered. Winner chooses ice cream flavors at noon. Mint and black cherry, she said. You can choose if you win, but you will not. They took a red canoe with a scar down its side and pushed off into water that felt as if it had been poured fresh for them. Jenna settled in the stern, paddle blade slicing in a way her body remembered better than her mind. Luke found his balance with a few gentle corrections and a laugh when the canoe wobbled at the first wake from a motorboat far across the bay. They moved easily without needing to talk over much, the way people sometimes do when the gestures fit. J-stroke, Jenna called softly. Feather your blade. Think about a sentence you love and let your body write it. You make everything poetry, he said. But he did what she told him, and the canoe obeyed. They glided along the shore, where lily pads laid their green coins in clusters, and dragonflies traded gossip. A heron lifted itself from the reeds with priestly dignity. Sun warmed the backs of their necks. When they reached the shadow of the point, where the water turned cold enough to speak its own language, they drifted and let the boat rock. Tell me something true, Luke said, propping his paddle across the gunwales. Jenna looked at the line where water met sky. I pretend my life is fine because it is tidy, but I am lonely in the kind of way that does not admit itself easily. He nodded, unsurprised and unoffended by her honesty. My turn. I do not stay long in one place because it is easier to leave before anyone notices I am there. People notice, she said gently. Even when you leave like a gentleman. He dipped his fingers into the lake and flicked cold droplets into the summer heat. Another truth, he said. I have not laughed like this in a long time. Then you must be the mint and black cherry kind, she teased, and his grin broke, wide and young. They returned to the dock with sore shoulders and the kind of hunger that belongs to mornings completed well. At noon, they stood on the sun-hot boards, with cones in hand, Jenna's a green and purple tower. Luke's 2 shades of brown he refused to name until she guessed correctly. Maple walnut and espresso chip. You are a city person, she declared. You try to be complicated. I am simple, he protested. I just like coffee in all of its forms. Even the melted kind, she said, pointing to the drip on his wrist. He licked it away like a kid and bowed when she applauded the performance. The day lengthened into the golden afternoon that only lakes can manufacture. Light sifted through leaves. Children launched dock-to-dock relay races that seemed to include rules, written in chalk and rewritten with every lap. Ruth sat in a lawn chair, mending a net and ruling kindly from the shade. Jenna and Luke claimed 2 of the faded striped loungers by the shore and let conversation unspool. She told him about the city's particular loneliness, how the elevator walls could learn the shape of your quiet. He told her about places where the stars were so many, they made a noise, how sleeping in the back of a truck under those skies had both fixed and unstrung him. She learned he carried a small notebook because some words are not meant to be typed. He learned she kept old ticket stubs because proof of joy was a necessary kind of archive. Around them, summer performed its ancient play. Teenagers practicing guitar by trial and error, toddlers sleeping with wet hair and open mouths, a couple in their 70s, holding hands as if they had invented the technique. They swam because the lake had been asking. The cold shock made her gasp and then laugh at her own gasp. Luke cannonballed with a splash so ridiculous a nearby child clapped. They floated on their backs and identified cloud animals that refused to hold a shape long enough to be named. When they climbed back onto the dock, everything tasted better. Water, blueberries, the salt left on the lips by sun and laughter. Near sunset, a small band tuned up on the porch. Fairy lights blinked themselves awake like shy stars. The lodge staff rolled out long tables for the barbecue, and the smell of smoke joined the perfume of pine and skin and sunscreen. Luke appeared beside Jenna, with 2 plates balanced on one forearm, because apparently he could do circus tricks when needed. He had also found the watermelon and the good pickles, the ones Ruth kept tucked behind the potato salad. "Education continues," he said, handing her a fork with a flourish. "Lesson 1. Lodge etiquette regarding the last slice of pie. You claim it in the name of a child," Jenna said. "You are merely a courier." "Ah," he said, eyes widening. "Ethics." They ate with their knees touching under the picnic bench, the simple contact feeling both accidental and inevitable. When the first song meandered from the porch, Jenna's foot began to keep time. Luke noticed, of course he did. "Starlight sway," he reminded her later, when the real stars came out to study the scene. "You remembered," she said. "I am a reliable student," he said, then held out his hand again and waited as if patience were a compliment. They swayed because the night asked sweetly. His palm found the small of her back, respectful and warm. The music chose something with a slow hinge to it. When she tipped her head up, Luke's gaze lingered on her mouth and then rose to her eyes again. A gentleman who knew the discipline of restraint. The air between them was the temperature of possibility. Jenna felt an urge to kiss him, sudden and honest. It shocked her a little. It had been a long time since wanting had arrived without a spreadsheet of pros and cons. But she held the want lightly, like a firefly she admired and would not cage. Not yet. Not tonight. They walked the shore after the last song, their shoulders brushing, fireflies making a galaxy of the field. At her crooked step, they paused. "Same tomorrow?" Luke asked, carefully casual. "Same," she said, "and probably more of it." He grinned. "I will bring cinnamon rolls as an apology for the canoe incident I will cause." "Accepted in advance," she said, and slept that night with the sense that summer had budged over on the bench and patted the space beside it, inviting her to sit. Chapter 3. The edge of the horizon. The next days folded themselves into a tapestry of small rituals. Coffee on the porch before the sun burned the mist away. Paddle strokes that left parentheses on the water. Ice cream at noon because noon was an abstract concept. and the lake did not care what time it was. Afternoons swimming, until their fingers wrinkled, then drying like contented otters on the dock. Evenings filled with music, stories, the citrus glow of citronella candles, fending off the smallest biters with surprising valor. And between those rituals, the private thread of a connection that gathered quiet strength. Luke's hand on the canoe when she stepped in, Jenna's laugh breaking low and warm when he mispronounced the name of a northern bird and then defended himself with a speech about regional dialect, the way he memorized the names of the children who found him wherever he stood, and asked if he could skip rocks with them. The way she noticed he took his phone calls down by the far point where the wind was louder and the words could hide. He did not talk much about the past. He spoke about towns and jobs, friends who were siblings of, the road, a dog he had loved and lost years ago to a sudden quiet. He did not tell stories all the way to the end. Sometimes his gaze went to the horizon, the way a compass needle goes north, longing and inevitable. Jenna, who had built a life on finishing what she started, found herself standing easily beside someone who seemed comfortable pausing mid-sentence. It felt like watching a bird decide whether to land or keep flying on a late afternoon when the sky had found that astonishing blue that exists only between storms. Jenna and Luke beached the canoe on the far shore and walked the pine path that led to a high overlook. The light went gold as it slid through needles. Chipmunks scolded them for existing. When they reached the rocky rise, the whole lake lay open, bays and coves, the lodge a set of toy houses, the dock a scrap of punctuation. Luke stood with his hands in his pockets, looking far. The wind tugged at his shirt, as if asking him to turn and listen to another conversation. Jenna leaned against the warm rock and let the quiet form questions she was afraid to ask. "Tell me something you are not telling me," she said, finally, the words gentle. He inhaled, slow and careful, then exhaled as if he had been holding that breath longer than he had realized. "I am waiting for a call," he said, "and after that call, I may not be able to stay." "How long?" she asked, mouth dry. "How long until you know?" "A day," he said, "or 3, or maybe a week if weather and luck conspire." "What happens after the call?" The wind lifted her hair and set it down again. She did not brush it away. It felt important to let the moment muss her. "I might have to go back west," he said. "There is a job I have promised, and a person I cannot disappoint, and a place I left before I learned how to say goodbye." "A place," she repeated. "Not a person." He smiled, sad and sweet. "Places are people. It is cheating to pretend otherwise." She looked at his profile, chiseled by sun, and that soft scruff, and wanted to catalog every inch of him, like a shoreline she feared she would forget. "You do not want to stay," she said, not accusing, but locating truth. "I want to stay more than I'd expected," he said. "That is what astonishes me. And it is what frightens me." He looked at her then, and she saw all of it, the want, the fear, the thread of obligation he had tied to something behind him because he was a good man, and good men keep knots they might wish to cut. "I did not plan to meet you, Jenna." "I did not plan to meet you either," she said, and let a smile happen even though the ground inside her had shifted. "I planned to eat lemon bars and stare at water and mind my business." "We failed spectacularly," he said, and she reached for his hand and wove her fingers through his because failure can be a love language. They walked back down through the pines, quieter than they had climbed. That night at the fire pit, songs felt heavier, stories slower, marshmallows less sweet. Lucan's phone glowed at the far edge of the dock, a tiny moon. He stepped away to answer one call, then another, the wind swallowing most of his words. When he returned, he had that look people wear when they are trying to stand on two boats at once. "Tomorrow," he said. "When the fairy lights dimmed and the lodge exhaled, I will know more tomorrow." "Tomorrow," she repeated, and tried to believe the word could be a friend. In her cabin, sleep would not sit. It paced the floor with her. Jenna remembered every time she had told herself she did not need more, that she could make do with less, if less was neat and contained. She touched the window frame and felt the cool lift from the glass. Out on the water, a loon called again, a sound that held longing and welcome in equal measure. She wanted to be brave enough to love something that could leave. She wanted to be kind to the self who might remain when it did. The morning arrived with a sky like pewter, storm tucked somewhere and deciding whether to break. Jenna took her coffee to the dock and tried to be faithful to Dawn. Luke sat beside her without a word. He had shaved in the way of someone who expected to face a day that would ask him for answers. The phone call came late morning. He rose when it buzzed and walked to the far point again. Jenna watched him go and made herself stay sitting. She made herself breathe one breath and then another. When he returned, the answer was already in his eyes. "I am sorry," he said, and the words were heavier than she had expected. "I have to go west, tonight if I can find a flight, tomorrow at the latest." He let out a breath that wanted to be a laugh and did not make it. "There is a wildfire. The volunteer crew is short. The friend who called, I cannot not go." "Of course you go," she said, relief and grief warring in her chest, and neither ashamed of itself. "Of course you go." "I did not want it to be noble," he said, rueful. "I wanted it to be simple." "Sometimes noble is just simple with more smoke," she said, and stood because sitting suddenly felt too small for the ache in her. They walked to the main house to tell Ruth and to borrow the office computer that had seen decades of emergencies and flight searches and weddings booked late. Ruth nodded when Luke explained, her eyes shining with that complicated kindness people who run lodges have learned. "When a call calls, you answer," she said. "We will pack you sandwiches, and we will not pretend we are not sorry to see you go." Jenna helped him fold his few clothes into his small bag. She smoothed the shirt he had left draped over the chair, as if it were her heart and deserved neatness. They did not say grand things, They said true ones. I did not expect this to matter, she confessed. It does. I did not expect to want to stay, he confessed. I do. He kissed her on the dock when the sky finally broke and rain made the lake a drum. It was not a kiss of possession or promises it could not keep. It was a kiss of right now, of I see you, of thank you for this exact brief life. We lived inside a handful of golden afternoons. When they parted, she tasted rain and cinnamon and something like courage. I will call, he said, not to be noble, to be honest. I will answer, she said, not to be good, to be brave. Ruth handed him a paper bag with sandwiches and an apple tucked into the corner, and Luke slung his bag over his shoulder and started up the path toward the parking lot where his car waited, where the road would release him back into a world that burns and mends. He turned once and lifted a hand. Jenna lifted hers. It did not feel like goodbye. It felt like a comma. She stood in the rain until the sky softened and the lakeside and the fire pit hissed itself back into quiet. Then she went to find a towel and the lemon bars and the long afternoon that was suddenly emptier and still, somehow, full. Chapter 4. After the golden hour. Storms clear the air, and sometimes they clear the heart. The next morning, the lake was glass, a mirror so exact that the clouds seemed to admire themselves. Jenna walked to the dock with her coffee and sat cross-legged in her sweatshirt and watched the world pretend stillness while it continued invisibly to move. A child dropped a stick into the water and waited for a frog to claim it. Ruth swept the porch in soft, efficient arcs. Somewhere, a hammer tapped once, twice, then found a rhythm, and the rhythm changed again. Her phone lay face down beside her. She had expected checking it to feel like hunger. Instead, it felt like an invitation to breathe deeper. She turned it over anyway. One message, landed in the desert, driving north. I will be where the smoke is by afternoon. I wanted to hear the word you would send me, if you could throw it like a pebble into this road. She smiled, a small, private smile that tucked itself under her ribs. She typed, steady. Then she put the phone away. Days adjusted. She kept to the rituals because the rituals were faithful. She paddled at dawn and let the mist bless her shoulders. She chose mint and black cherry at noon, though once she chose espresso chip as an act of complicated solidarity. She swam in water that welcomed her without applause. She began to read a book on the porch and then set it down to watch two teenagers teach each other to waltz on the grass. She wrote postcards she would never send, like prayers that do not need mail. At night, under fairy lights, she danced with a little boy who decided she was the right height for his theory of twirling. She sang along when she knew the words, hummed when she did not, and laughed at herself when she tried to roast a marshmallow, distractingly, and ended with a flambe. The ache of missing did not flatten her. It made space inside her for light to move differently. Luke called once, late, the line carrying the hum of a motel air conditioner and the vastness that desserts fold into sound. He did not talk about fire, other than to say it is a living thing and we are trying to persuade it to sleep. He asked about the lake, as if it were a person whose gossip he might need. She described the exact green at 3 in the afternoon. the way the heron had landed, with so much dignity even Ruth had clapped. He was quiet in the way of someone listening to water in his imaginations. "I can picture it," he said, and she could hear the grateful smile in it. "I can picture you," she said, and then, because she had promised herself her new bravery would be practical, she added, "When you are done, will you come back?" There was silence, but not the hurt kind, the considering kind. "If the road is kind," he said, "if the place I left can forgive the leaving, if the person I need to look in the eyes says what I hope and fear, yes, I will come back. If the lake is kind," she said, smiling, "and if lemon bars still cool on the counter, I will be here." A week turned like a page carefully. The lodge grew a little quieter as some families left and others arrived each weekend, a tide that polished the stones of the calendar. Jenna found she was not counting days up or down. She was living them the way you live a good song, inside it, trusting it to end itself well. One afternoon, she walked the pine path to the high overlook alone. The light did its gold thing, because that was its habit and also its pride. She stood where she and Luke had stood and put her hand against the warm rock and said aloud, "Because the trees are good at confidentiality, I do not know the ending. I do not need to. I want to begin well and continue honestly." A squirrel scolded her for making a declaration on his personal stage. She laughed and tossed him a crumb from her pocket and felt the world nod, small and sufficient. The next morning, she woke before the bell. She had not planned to go to the dock. She found herself there anyway, pulled by muscle memory and the gentle habit of hope. Fog clung to the water as if asking for a few more minutes. The boards were cool. Her breath made a white thought in the air. The world felt paused like a promise, taking shape at the edge of the frame. A car door thumped in the gravel lot. A footstep on the path, steady and sure. She did not stand right away. She let the sound come to her, the way a ripple comes to shore, not rushing, not slowed. When she looked back, Luke was there, thinner at the edges, smoke in his clothes, like a story that would take time to untangle. His hair had surrendered to ash and wind. His eyes were the same impossible lakeshade. "Hi," he said, as if he had just gone to fetch coffee. "Hi," she said, as if her heart had not gone on a small pilgrimage and returned with stamps in its quiet passport. He sat beside her and put his feet in the water with the seriousness of a ritual. For a while they watched the fog and let the morning shift its weight. When he did speak, it was not a speech. It was the kind of small paragraph that holds a world. "It was hard," he said. "It was necessary. The person I needed to see looked me in the face and told me to quit believing penance requires leaving the good places first. The place I left forgave me for needing to go. The road brought me back because I asked it to." "Ruth saved you a lemon bar," Jenna said. "Which is to say, I put one in the freezer before I knew it was wise." He laughed, and then the laugh moved to his eyes, and then it became a sigh, and then it became nothing again, because words were not needed for this next part. He reached for her hand, and she gave it, and the touch was both new and exactly what her skin had been practicing for since the night beneath the fairy lights. "I do not know how long I can stay," he said. "I do not have the kind of life that announces vacations 6 months ahead, But I do know how to keep promises better than I used to. I know how to call. I know how to show up. I want to stay until I am called away for a good reason. And I want my reasons to change. She nodded. I will not ask you to be a person you are not. And I will not be less than I am to make this simpler. But I am willing to build something that does not mind that summer ends so long as the work is kind. Then we are the same kind of brave, he said. They did not kiss right away. They sat with their feet in the lake and let the fog lift and the first boat draw its neat line, and the lodge wake behind them, bowl by bowl, voice by voice. They let cinnamon rolls exist and coffee be poured, and Ruth pretend she was not watching from the porch, with tears she would deny. When they did finally turn toward each other, it was the softest thing, foreheads first, breath shared, lips finding the agreement they had been writing together in all those small consistencies. It felt like signing a contract, written by water and sunlight, countersigned by wood smoke and pie. Summer continued, not stolen now, but lived on purpose. There were still canoe races and crooked steps, still stars that made a lace of the dark, still ice cream at irresponsible hours, and music drifting across the lawn. There were also phone calls that began with, "I miss the sound the dock makes in wind," and replies that began with, "It is making that sound right now." There were days when Luke fixed small broken things with a patience that made toddlers applaud, and evenings when Jenna read aloud from a book to anyone within earshot, because stories sounded better by the lake. And when summer finally took on that faint, thinned light that means it is planning its exit, they did not panic. They wrote down the dates of a fall festival and a winter visit and the spring opening weekend that always came earlier than sensible. They talked about how bravery looks in January and how lemon bars taste in November and where the stars hide in March. They agreed to send each other proof of joy, a photo of first snow on the city sidewalk, a recording of loons teaching their young, a snapshot of Ruth pretending to scold them for stealing pie, and failing because love makes bad actors of us all. On the last official night of the season, fairy lights hung low and generous. The band chose a song that knew how to be both goodbye and hello. Jenna and Luke swayed beneath the same strand where they had swayed that first night, their steps surer, their ease earned. He whispered, "Welcome home," and she answered, "For now," and they both heard the promise, the words contained, big enough to live in, because some summers fade into the same old calendar, and some summers change the calendar into a story. Lakeshore Lodge would see them again. The dock would keep the shape of their feet as part of its wood. The lake would remember the weight of the canoe, like a comma in a sentence it planned to continue. And somewhere far and sometimes near, two people who had learned to be the same kind of brave would choose, again and again, to make a life that did not wait for the perfect season to begin. They stood on the dock until the stars took over. Fireflies made constellations in the grass. The water said the soft thing water always says when it is thanked. Jenna leaned her head on Luke's shoulder, and he kissed her hair, and the night did not end so much as turn the page. Thank you for spending this evening with Moonlit Romantic. For Jenna and Luke, summer wasn't stolen. It was chosen in paddle strokes and porch coffee. in honest questions and a promise to be the same kind of brave, even when seasons change. If stolen summer nights brought you a little peace tap-like, subscribe and share this bedtime story with someone who loves quiet endings and hopeful tomorrows. Rest easy tonight. Breathe deeply. And remember, home can be a dock at dawn, a voice on the line, or a hand you keep choosing again and again. Good night from Moonlit Romantic. Sleep well.